The Otaku Cannibal, or the Rat Man. Tsutomu Miyazaki on August 21, 1962, in Itsukaichi, a town in the western part of the Tokyo metropolitan area, Tsutomu Miyazaki was born. He was the result of incest. His father had slept with his older sister. The boy was born prematurely, weighing 2.2 kilograms, and with abnormalities in his hands, elongated fingers, fused and constantly twisted joints. In order to control his upper limbs, he needed to move his entire forearm. Relationships in Tsutomu's family were not warm. His biological mother was replaced by his father's wife. The sisters disliked Tsutomu, and his parents also did not show warmth and understanding towards the child. They were constantly working. The only close person for the child was his grandfather, who shared all the hardships with his grandson. Nevertheless, Miyazaki was among the best students in elementary and middle school, and became the first from the lower grades who managed to pass the entrance exams to an elite educational institution. But not everything was so rosy. The boy became an outcast. Children bullied Tsutomu because of his deformity, calling him funny hands. In high school, his academic performance began to decline. He was increasingly immersed in a world he had created for himself. Instead of studying, Tsutomu read and drew manga, and was interested in the horror genre. This was one of the reasons for the development of his bloodthirsty personality. The teenager avidly watched the series Guinea Pig, the episodes of which in the future became the main scheme by which Miyazaki's murders were committed. Tsutomu was unable to enroll in English teacher training, as he had dreamed, and instead was admitted to Meiji University as a photo technician. In college, the young man's oddities only intensified, and the ridicule was no longer due to his hands, which had ceased to stand out. He developed an inferiority complex because of his penis size and inability to communicate with girls. His penis is no thicker than a pencil and no longer than a toothpick, a classmate once joked. He often attended sports events on his campus. However, according to the confession of his college friends, Miyazaki was not interested in sports. He just loved to photograph the crotches of female tennis players on the tennis courts, to use their photos for mass in the evenings. In 1984, Miyazaki began to take an interest in erotic materials involving children, the distribution of which was not prohibited in Japan. He continued to feel support only from his beloved grandfather, but in May 1988, he passed away. This exacerbated the young man's depression and isolated him from society even more. In an attempt to preserve at least something of him, Miyazaki ate his grandfather's ashes. Tsutomu wanted him to be reborn, and believed that the reincarnation would not be complete if any part of his grandfather remained. A few weeks later, one of his sisters caught her brother watching her while she was taking a shower. When asked to leave, Miyazaki attacked her and hit the girl's head against the bathtub. When his mother stood up for her daughter, telling Tsutomu that he should do something more productive than just reading comics and watching movies, the young man beat her. Already at this time, Miyazaki had a collection of adult magazines, as well as more than 1,000 videos with child and action movies based on cartoons. In the Japanese prefecture of Saitama on August 22, 1988 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a 4-year-old girl named Mari Konno left her house and headed to a neighboring house to visit her friend. The child never returned home, and her father, after unsuccessful attempts to find her, contacted the police that same evening, who immediately began searching for her. A man driving by in a car noticed the walking girl and, stopping, offered to take Mari to a beautiful place. The little girl, joyfully agreeing, got into the car with the stranger. After driving about 50 kilometers, the man brought Mari to a wooded area west of Tokyo, and parking the car under a bridge, helped the girl get out. For about 30 minutes, the stranger sat and watched the girl play happily, and then approached her from behind and strangled her. Having made sure that the little girl was dead, he carefully undressed her and engaged in sexual intercourse with the corpse. After committing the act, the man left Maris' body in the forest not far from his house. The man photographed the entire process. He took the girl's clothes as a souvenir and left. The police, volunteers, and all concerned citizens conducted an extensive search for the missing child. More than 50,000 posters with Maris' picture were hung at train stations and bus stops throughout Japan. Investigators questioned several dozen people in the neighborhood. The only information they managed to find out was that the girl had been seen with an unfamiliar man of plump build, about 30 years old. A thorough search for the child was conducted for several weeks, but the body was never found, and the description of the suspect yielded nothing. The case went cold. On October 3, 1988, Miyazaki committed his second murder. 7-year-old Masami Yoshizawa was walking home from school along a rural road. Driving up in his car, Tsutomu offered to give the girl a ride home. It was very hot and humid outside, so the girl agreed and got into the vehicle. Then, just as in the case with Mari Konno, Miyazaki took the child to the hills and strangled her. He raped the corpse and left it naked less than 100 meters from Maris' remains, taking only the girl's clothes with him. The police were quickly able to connect these two incidents into one series, as the girls lived not far from each other. The crimes had a similar pattern. No traces of the bodies were found, and the girls' parents received calls of the same nature. Tsutomu was dissatisfied with the press's reaction to his atrocities, so he decided that he should show himself, so that they would start talking about him on all TV channels and writing about him in all magazines. The man called the families of the missing girls almost every day, remaining silent or breathing heavily into the phone. If Miyazaki heard the phone ringing, he would call until he received an answer. Sometimes this silence on the phone could last for more than 20 minutes. On December 12, 1988, Miyazaki was returning home from a friend's house when he suddenly noticed 4-year-old Erika playing in the yard of her house. Getting out of the car, he called out to the girl, "Do you want to go somewhere fun?" The little girl agreed and, taking his hand, got into the sedan. When Tsutomu stopped at a parking lot in Naguri, Saitama, the girl was already crying. The man ordered Erika to strip naked in the back seat of the car and then began photographing the child in various indecent poses. Then, he strangled her as well, but this time he tied the corpse's hands and feet, wrapped it in a sheet and put it in the trunk. It was during the third murder that Tsutomu nearly got caught at the crime scene for the first time. While driving to dispose of Erika's body, his car hit a puddle and got stuck. A frightened Miyazaki quickly grabbed the body from the trunk and ran into the woods to dump it. When he returned with the sheet, 2 men were standing by his car, clearly concerned about the abandoned vehicle. They helped him push the Toyota out of the ditch it was stuck in, and Miyazaki sped off. A few days after the child's disappearance, her clothes and body were found in the woods. The girl's family would receive a postcard from the killer with letters cut out from magazines, saying Erika, cold, cough, throat, rest, death. 2 witnesses also reported a suspicious man and described his car, but were unable to recall the make. The police confirmed the connection between all 3 abducted girls and speculated that the other 2 children were also dead. A special unit was created to comb the area in search of the remains of Mari and Masami. While the police were searching for the killer and the girls' bodies, Miyazaki waited a few weeks for Mari Konno's corpse to decompose and returned to the forest to dismember the remains. He placed the severed hands and feet in his closet and cremated the remaining body parts in his furnace. He then ground them into a powder and sent them to the child's family in a box along with several teeth, photographs of her clothing, and a postcard that read, "Mari. Cremated. Bones. Investigate. Prove." The received remains were sent for examination to the legal department of Tokyo Dental University. Dr. Kazuo Suzuki concluded that they probably did not belong to Mari. Tsutomu Miyazaki was offended by this expert opinion and decided to prove otherwise. The editorial office of the Japanese newspaper, Asahi Shimbun, received a letter and a Polaroid photograph of a naked Mari. The message was signed with the fictitious female name Yuko Imada, which is a play on words meaning, "This is what I will tell you now" in Japanese. Here is part of the confession. I left a cardboard box with Maris remains in front of her house. I did it all by myself. From the beginning of the Mari incident to the end, I saw the police press conference where they said the remains did not belong to Mari. On camera, her mother said the report gave her new hope that Mari might still be alive. That's when I realized I had to write this confession, so Maris' mother wouldn't continue to hope in vain. I repeat, the remains belong to Mari. After a second medical examination, it was confirmed that the remains did indeed belong to the girl. And the police had a letter straight from the killer's hands. They could not identify the murderer from the message, but the photograph, postcard paper, and the scent box became important evidence for catching the criminal. However, the active police search did not stop the killer. On June 1st, 1989, he invited a 6-year-old girl to a park, took off her panties, and began photographing her in various poses. Fortunately, some concerned passers-by noticed this and scared the killer away. A few days later, Miyazaki noticed a 5-year-old girl named Ayako Nomoto playing in a Buddhist park. Tsutomu approached her, introducing himself as a photojournalist, and asked her to pose for him. He led the girl to his car and gave her chewing gum to calm her down. According to the killer, Ayako began to laugh at his hands, which infuriated him. Miyazaki strangled the girl, violated her body, wrapped the corpse in a sheet, and took it to his home. Tsutomu repeatedly engaged in acts of necrophilia, photographing and filming it until the body began to decompose. Then, he dismembered the lifeless girl. The man threw her legs and torso near a public toilet in a cemetery, while keeping her hands and head. The head was found in his closet, along with the clothes of the murdered girls and body parts of Mari. He fried the hands and ate them, washing them down with Ayako's blood. He also burned her hair, clothes, and the bloodied plastic bags in which he transported the child's remains. Fearing that the police would find Nomoto's body parts, Miyazaki returned to the cemetery 2 weeks later and took them to his apartment, where he hid them in the same closet. However, Tsutomu himself provided a reason for his capture. On June 23, 1989, he was caught molesting 2 sisters, aged 6 and 4. The man convinced the younger girl to go with him to the river to be photographed. Meanwhile, the killer forgot about the older girl, who ran home and told her father, who immediately rushed to save his daughter. The man came upon a horrific scene. The little girl was completely naked, and the naked stranger was photographing her between her legs, trying to zoom the lens into her vagina. The father knocked Tsutomu to the ground, but the killer managed to break free and escape. Fortunately, the police were already waiting for him by his car, where he was apprehended. Court initially, Miyazaki was charged with coercing a minor into committing indecent acts. However, when he was arrested by the police, Tsutomu confessed to the murder of Ayako Nomoto as well. During a search of his bungalow, 5,763 videotapes were discovered, some containing anime and slasher films, but mostly child pornography and horror movies. Among them, video recordings and photographs of his victims were also found. Further investigation led the killer to confess to the murders of Mari Konno and Erika Namba. The remains of the girls and their clothing were found in a closet, while dismembered body parts and gnawed bones of the girls' hands and feet were discovered in the forest, where Tsutomu committed his crimes. Miyazaki's father refused to pay for his legal defense, stating, "It would be unfair to the victims." His son wrote him an angry letter cursing him and accusing him of all sins. In 1994, the man committed suicide, unable to come to terms with the person he had raised. The trial of Tsutomu Miyazaki began in March 1990 and lasted for 7 years. A psychological test conducted showed that the defendant had no apparent mental disorders. However, the defense team insisted that Tsutomu had a limited sense of responsibility for his crimes and could not distinguish between right and wrong. "We want to create enough arguments for the judge to sentence Miyazaki to life imprisonment," his lawyer said. The first medical report proved that Tsutomu was capable of taking responsibility for his actions. The defense demanded a reassessment of the defendant's psychological state. After conducting 2 more examinations, it was concluded that Tsutomu suffered from schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder, that is, a split personality. During the trial, the man claimed that all the murders were committed by his alter ego named Ratman. However, despite a strong defense, Miyazaki was still sentenced to the maximum punishment, death by hanging. The brutal murder of 4 girls to satisfy his sexual desire leaves no room for leniency, stated Supreme Court Chief Justice Tokiyasu Fujita. Miyazaki disagreed with the court's decision. "This must be wrong. One day I will be found innocent." In his letter from death row, he also wrote things like, "This is stupid. This judge will regret it. He must be an idiot," and about the victims. "There's not much to say about them. I'm happy thinking I did a good deed." Tsutomu also demanded the return of his video collection and car, and requested a lethal injection like in America, rather than hanging. The killer wrote, "According to the current method of execution in Japan, death row inmates must experience intense fear during execution, and therefore will not have the opportunity to regret their actions. For this reason, we should switch to lethal injections, which are used in the United States." The death sentence was carried out at the Tokyo Detention Center on June 17, 2008. Tsutomu Miyazaki was 45 years old. Tsutomu's ashes were brought to his mother, but she refused to take them, saying they could just be thrown away. His sisters' marriages fell apart, their careers plummeted. No one wanted to associate with the family of Japan's most notorious killer. The street where Tsutomu killed one of his victims in a car was closed. The park where the girls' remains were found was demolished. The current whereabouts of Miyazaki's ashes are unknown. Japanese society did everything to forget the killer and eradicate all that was associated with his crimes that shocked the entire country. This is how the story of Tsutomu Miyazaki, a serial killer, pedophile, necrophile, kidnapper, vampirist, and cannibal came to an end.